Hey, true crime fanatics, I'm Jake Barton, creator of the history storytelling podcast called Historium, and you're listening to California Dreaming on the Orbital Jigsaw Network.
This episode of California Dreaming is brought to you by BLUBRRY. Creating a podcast isn't that simple. It's more than just recording yourself and uploading it. To really get your show to be everything you want it to be, you're going to need a little bit more than that. You need easy and reliable hosting so your time can be spent creating your content. You need the most accurate download stats so you know if you're reaching your audience that you're wanting to. And a web page that makes setting up totally easy on you and won't take up too much of your valuable time. And BLUBRRY offers all of this and more for hosts and aspiring hosts alike. Simple media hosting, a fully integrated WordPress website, with their PowerPress sites. So, if you already have a podcast or you've always dreamed about starting one, then head over to orbitaljigsaw.com/dream to sign up, and the first month is on us. The BLUBRRY support team is available to walk you through the steps of migrating your show without losing subscribers, or to help you get started in the process of launching your new show. To get your first month for free, use promo code DREAM. You've got no excuses. And now, on to today's show. This is a warning, and please listen carefully. This episode involves a mass shooting incident with high-powered weapons that will include details of violent and multiple deaths, including the deaths of young children, an infant, and an unborn child, as well as an incident of animal cruelty, which I will also provide a warning to as we approach these parts of the case. As always, we will be respectful to all the victims and families, but this episode is not for the faint of heart. If you think this may be too distressing for you, then this might be one for you to pass on. It is not suitable for young listeners, and listener discretion is advised. And dreamers, today's episode is brought to you by... No, I don't have any fancy sponsors other than you guys, but it is brought to you by a really good and thought-provoking question Dave W. asked in our group sometime a couple weeks ago. What was the spark that ignited your passion for true crime? Dave said his was sparked when he came across the Lizzie Borden story when he was in middle school. Not too long after that, he found a copy of Helter Skelter, the book by Vincent Bugliosi about the Manson family murders in his parents' collection. And since then, he's been hooked. And then, like many of us, Dave's interest in true crime podcasts had its genesis with Serial. Elizabeth C. said she was only 8 years old when Susan Smith drowned her kids in John D. Long Lake, located in Union County, South Carolina, on October 25, 1994. And it was from then on she was interested in killers, mass murders, and how they operated. Suzanne B. also credits reading Helter Skelter when she was a teen for sparking her true crime fascination. Karen M. commented that it was the polyclass abduction and murder that was her first notion of terrible things happening for seemingly no reason. She was 11 and she was taking everything in about Polly's story. Mary M. said it was Agatha Christie crime novels, which she began reading at the age of 13, that sparked her love of the genre. She fell in love with crime of all kinds, dramas, mysteries, whodunits, police shows, documentaries, and then she discovered podcasts and she's having a ball. We all are, honey. We all are. Darren J., our esteemed and humble administrator, said it was the assassination of JFK that got him. He obsessed over it for years, reading every book that he could find, including the Warren Report, which is a huge undertaking, dreamers. Just to understand the magnitude of this report, it took 10 months for the commission, headed by its chairman, Chief Justice Earl Warren, to complete its 888-page report of its findings, which, by the way, was followed up by another 25 volumes of hearings and exhibits. And it conclusively found that Lee Harvey Oswald assassinated President Kennedy all by himself. Jeremiah W. mentioned Dan Zupansky as his spark for his love of true crime. I mentioned Dan Zupansky a couple episodes back in his podcast, True Murder, The Most Shocking Killers in True Crime, during the story involving Robert Piernock. The author of the book on that story, A Checklist for Murder, Anthony Flacco, was a guest on his show. I want to say Dan's show has been around for about 6 years, maybe more. He's been a guest on True Crime Garage, and the Garage guys have referred to him as the godfather of true crime, which I'd say is pretty accurate. He is one of the first podcasts I listened to as well. Kathy M., with a C, said that her dad worked at Ashworth Hospital in Liverpool, and Ian Brady, the Moores murderer, was staying there. The Moores murders were committed by Ian Brady and Myra Hindley in and around the Manchester, England area from July of 1963 to October of 1965. Their victims were Pauline Reed, John Kilbride, Keith Bennett, Leslie Ann Downey, and Edward Evans, all children between the ages of 10 and 17. So Kathy's dad worked there where Ian Brady had been hospitalized. That's pretty scary. If you'd like to listen to more about the Moores murders, Case File has a pretty comprehensive series dedicated to the crimes. You probably need to look no further than that, but I also found Serial Killers has a 2-parter as well, as does the All Killa No Filla podcast, the Nothing Rhymes with Murder podcast, Slaughter, and History Dweebs. There's a lot out there to listen to on the case. Chris T., with a K, said that when she was 6, her uncle was murdered, and just the look in her grandmother's eyes, that it was at that moment she understood loss, and it made her want to research everything she could to see if other families felt that feeling as well. Owen P. said it was the first season of Serial that turned him on to true crime. Kim C. said that she went horseback riding at Spawn Ranch in the 60s when strange people started to move into the area. Then the Manson murders took place. Then the East Area rapist happened when she moved to Northern California, which, by the way, as I'm writing this, the news is breaking that a DNA match has been made and the man suspected of those killings and rapes has been taken into custody. Carol L. shared that she is a survivor, and from that, her interest in understanding the criminal mind set in. Valerie W. said that in 3rd grade she became obsessed with natural disasters and that she used to carry books around on the subject, and people thought it was kind of weird, so the jump to true crime wasn't that big of a deal. And then she saw a movie about Bonnie and Clyde, moved on to serial killers, and the rest just fell into place. Jen B. said that she heard about Jack the Ripper when she was 10. She wanted all the details that she could find, and it just grew from there. She's into the gory stuff, so she says. Christopher L. said it was all about Charles Manson for him. Alicia W. says it was the whispers she would hear about Ted Bundy when she was a kid, which was soon followed up by the Green River Killer when she was a teenager. She lived near some of the places that he would leave his victims. Beth M., she's like my friend, not an original true crime friend. She got turned on to true crime, at least to podcasts, because I forced her to listen to mine. Mary E. said that her dad worked for the Los Angeles District Attorney's Office and one of his cases was Charles Manson, and she would see her dad on the news while the trial was going on, and after that she became a nurse and eventually a correctional officer at the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation in San Luis Obispo. Very cool, Mary E. Janie D. said she was turned on to true crime when she saw Small Sacrifices with Farrah Fawcett, and then she read the book by Ann Rule. I think lots of us can partially credit Ann Rule for turning us on to true crime. Kelly S. said that her dad was a police officer in Toronto and then in Colorado, so she heard lots of stories growing up. Donna M. commented that the stories about the Wild West, stuff like Billy the Kid, the James Gang, the Ungers, that sort of stuff is what she enjoyed reading when she was a kid. Sharon E. said it was also the Moore murders too, then Anne Roebuck's, then JonBenet Ramsey. Yep, relatable. Marion S. commented that she became interested in true crime by reading the Justice Story feature every Sunday in the New York Daily News when she was a kid. Cindy T. said it was also the Kennedy assassination that got to her, as it happened when she was only 8 years old. Sarah P. said it was all about unsolved mysteries when she was a kid. I know, right? Same. Nikki H. said her grandma always had a bunch of true crime paperbacks and was a huge fan of the movie of the week, and she watched The Burning Bed when she was young, and then she watched Geraldo open Al Capone's vault. Nikki, I am still not over that letdown of that vault. Laura T. said that her parents were obsessed with the murder of Joanne Thatcher by her husband, Colin Thatcher, who was a police officer and politician in Saskatchewan, Canada. Plus, there were always true crime books on the shelves at home that she would try to sneak peeks at as a child. My answer was Richard Ramirez and Ted Bundy. I think I've talked about their influence on my personal obsession with true crime, how Richard Ramirez operated in and around the area where I grew up, which was all happening when I was only 10. And I first remember hearing about Ted Bundy in 1989 when he was executed in Florida. It was on the front page of the morning paper, and I had to know more. And lastly, but not least, Renee C. first commented that she couldn't remember what sparked her interest in true crime, but then she followed that up with remembering being obsessed with the 1984 San Ysidro McDonald's massacre. And her comment began a lengthy thread about the tragedy. I was 9 when this mass shooting took place. I remember it being all over the news. But I honestly don't really remember feeling the magnitude of what had actually taken place in the moment. I remember being kind of confused about why there was crime scene tape around a McDonald's. It was one of the very first news stories I recall seeing on TV. And I came to find that not a lot of people have actually ever heard the story, as it was prominently reported on in the media at the time. And I'm hoping that in the course of writing, recording, and bringing you the story that there won't happen to be another tragic incident such as this. But sadly, I'm kind of skeptical. The story is going on 34 years since it happened, and it doesn't seem like much progress has been made in finding ways to stop mass shootings from being a part of our reality in the United States. As a matter of fact, it's gotten worse. And today, we are going to be taking a look at this mass shooting that stood as the worst in American history for 7 years. And it still stands as the worst in California history to this day. In this episode of California Dreaming, the tale of the San Ysidro tragedy. James Oliver Huberty wasn't feeling well on the morning of July 15, 1984. At least, that's what he said to his wife, Etna. He told her that he thought he might have a mental problem. What was her reaction to that? What would your reaction be? I'd be worried. I'd probably want to get some more details as to what might be bothering my husband. I don't know how much Etna decided to probe into whatever was bothering Huberty. From what I could glean, from everything that I've read, she had reached a point where she was kind of blasé about her husband's behaviors. Maybe this wasn't the first time he had told her that he thought he had a mental problem, but it would be the last. A couple of days later, on July 17th, Huberty took it upon himself to make a phone call to a mental health clinic. He wanted an appointment. The receptionist took down his information and told him that they would return his phone call in a matter of a couple hours. Huberty waited by the phone, expecting to hear back from them in the time frame which they told him. But the clinic, they did not call him back. What would have been going through his mind as he was sitting there staring at his telephone? Was that return phone call going to make or break this man? Whatever was going on in his mind, whatever was bothering him, to the point that he picked up the phone and reached out for help, was it all riding on whether or not they were going to reach back out to him? Questions like that can haunt you forever if you let them. According to Etna, when the clinic failed to return his call, he hastily left their home and took his motorcycle out for a ride. Where he went, his wife did not know. Perhaps to burn off some steam, to clear his mind, to search for a way to quiet the storm that he was feeling in his head. Or maybe just to think about what his next move was going to be. Whatever it was clear that he was perturbed by the fact that his phone call was never returned, wondering why wouldn't they call him back? Was it not that important to them? Was he not important? Why would they not take him seriously? Is he thinking, how dare they? Who knows? But the fact is, they did not call him back when they said they would. And there would be an endless amount of regret to come when Huberty didn't receive that call back. What Huberty did not know, what he could not have known, was he simply did not come across as someone who was in crisis. There was no urgency in his demeanor. To the individual who fielded his call, he seemed calm, quiet, polite even. There just was no sense of immediacy, so the receptionist marked his call as a non-crisis, which meant he would be contacted within 2 days, not a couple of hours as he was told. And his name was also misspelled as Shuberty, Shouberty, instead of Huberty, which is just Huberty. Not sure if that would have made a difference or not either way, as long as they had his number to call him back. The way Huberty's name is spelled was not really going to matter until the next afternoon. Only then would the magnitude of this phone call would become apparent. I imagine Huberty was asked some cursory questions, maybe, if he felt as though he was going to do some harm to himself or to others, and he said no, because if he had said yes, then I'd like to think his call would have been upgraded from non-crisis to emergency. So, assuming he said no, and otherwise did not come across as being in immediate danger, his call was handled according to protocol. It would later be reported that Huberty really did not want to discuss over the phone the nature of his troubles, pointing out that he had not been hospitalized for it, he was not taking any medications for it, nor was he currently under any type of treatment by a medical professional. But the person handling Huberty's call should have at least either, 1, made sure that he was called back within a couple of hours like he was told, or 2, told him that his call would be answered within 48 hours. Would that have made a difference in how Huberty would react to being ignored? We'll never know. Huberty returned home from his motorcycle ride about an hour later, and according to his wife, he appeared to her to be in a much better mood than when he'd left. Maybe his mental health crisis had subsided after an invigorating ride on his motorcycle? Or perhaps Huberty reached a resolution within himself as to how he was going to contend with whatever it was that was plaguing him. Either way, to Etna, it all seemed to have diminished. The couple, along with their 2 daughters, aged 10 and 12 at the time, sat down for dinner and afterwards enjoyed a family cycling trip to a neighborhood park. Later that evening, Huberty told his wife that he was praying. He went on to explain that God was 10 feet tall and had a long gray beard, but Christ was not as tall as you think he is. I don't know what Etna's reactions were to his ramblings. But then they sat together in the living room on the sofa and watched the Pink Panther movie on TV. She would say that he was very, very nice that evening, very much at ease, at peace. He warmed up some muffins that they shared, and after the movie ended, Huberty sat over in his favorite chair and shut his eyes. She gazed at him for a while. His mouth appeared to be moving. Perhaps he was talking or mumbling or praying to himself, but she did not hear any words escape from him. She could see that his hands were moving or motioning in some kind of manner. Was he having a dream? Or maybe a nightmare? She couldn't be certain. Edna couldn't decide if she should perhaps have said something to him, maybe nudge him awake, possibly even shake him out of this trance-like state he appeared to be in. But she didn't. She would eventually decide to just let him be. And she left him there, alone in his favorite chair, and she went to bed. He preferred that anyway. She knew he always liked to just be alone, lost in his own thoughts and dreams. The following morning, on July 18th, Huberty had some business to take care of at a traffic court in the northern part of San Diego, about 20 miles from where he resided. He had received a citation for speeding on March 1st, 1984, and then again on June 15th, he received a citation for driving on the left side of a divided road, and for driving without a registration sticker on his license plate. And he was at the court to fight all these tickets. His wife and kids went along with him, and the wait for his case to be called was long. Upwards of 3 hours, which, if you ask me, isn't too bad, all things considered. He could have had his case held over for the judge's 2-hour lunch break, so it's all perspective. And because Huberty and his family had been so patiently waiting in the courtroom for all those other cases to come and go before his, and they were actually the last people seated in the courtroom, the judge decided to let him off without having to pay the fine. Lucky guy, right? He thought so too. He left the court pretty happy that he got out of being on the hook for those tickets. Afterwards, Huberty decided he'd take his family to the San Diego Zoo. But it seemed like his mood had suddenly made a dark turn during the seemingly innocuous family outing. As they were taking in the exhibits at the zoo, he had apparently relayed to Etna that he felt like his life was effectively over. On the surface, it would seem like this was kind of an off-the-wall thing to say. The day seemed to be going well. He didn't have to pay those fines for those traffic tickets. He was spending some quality time with his family at arguably one of the most renowned animal parks in the country. All in all, it was turning out to be an okay day. But Huberty wasn't feeling it. In further talking to his wife about the fact that the mental health clinic he had called the day before failed to call him back, he told her, well, society had their chance. At this point, it is unclear what Etna's reaction or response was to her husband's statements. I assume she took him somewhat seriously because it was later determined that at some point during the day of July 18th, a woman identifying herself as James Huberty's wife made a phone call to the National City Health Center and explained to them that her husband had guns and was going to kill someone. She was instructed to call the police. However, she never did. Are you guys getting the feeling that these mental health institutes and health centers are kind of sort of dropping the ball a little bit here? I don't really want to point any fingers unnecessarily, but sometimes when you see red flags practically whipping people in the face, it's kind of hard to not look at these people and wonder how they could not see something volatile was about to explode. I know. Hindsight is 20/20, blah, blah, blah. We could all use this as a teaching moment, a learning experience as to what to look for when someone's about to go off the deep end. But have we actually done that yet? You tell me. So after the zoo, Huberty and his family stopped in at a McDonald's in the Claremont area of San Diego. This is a different McDonald's than the one where our story will take us a little bit later on the same afternoon. After lunch, the family went home. Etna went into the couple's bedroom to lay down for a bit. It had already been a long day with going to court and then to the zoo. But unbeknownst to her, that day was about to get even longer. Huberty changed his clothes. He put on some camouflage pants and a burgundy-colored shirt. He came over to where his wife was laying down. He leaned in and told her that he wanted to kiss her goodbye. She asked him where he was going. His ominous answer? Hunting for humans. He had 3 weapons hidden under a checkered blanket. He told his eldest daughter that he wouldn't be back. And then he went out the front door and headed to do exactly what he told his wife he was going to do. Who was this James Huberty person? He was born October 11th, 1942 in Canton, Ohio. He was one of 2 children. He had a sister, Ruth. His parents were Earl and Evelyn Huberty. His father was a steel mill worker, and on the side he was a farmer. The family regularly attended their local United Methodist Church and were described as Bible toters. When he was only 3, he was stricken with polio, from which he did make a remarkable recovery, but it did leave him with lifelong issues with difficulties walking. Around the time Huberty was 10, his father purchased a farm in the Amish country of Pennsylvania. However, Huberty's mother was unhappy with this decision. She did not want to live in Amish country and refused to do so. It was not too long after the purchase of that farm that she up and abandoned her husband and children. She joined a Southern Baptist organization and dedicated her life to sidewalk preaching on behalf of the organization. It would be the sudden abandonment of his mother that would leave an indelible mark on Huberty's life as a child, as an adolescent, all the way into adulthood. His personality turned inward, morose and withdrawn, emotionally and socially. Everyone who knew Huberty growing up were certain that he would eventually go into divinity school, and they also would describe him as unremarkable, a loner, very awkward with horn-rimmed glasses, who rarely ever said a thing to anyone. He never participated in school. He shied away from interacting with anyone. However, he did have an interest in the future farmers of America. And when word got out after Huberty and his peers graduated from Waynedale High School, class of 1960, that he was headed not for divinity school but to embalming school, it was kind of a shock. Huberty wanted to be a mortician. In 1962, Huberty did attend a Jesuit community college, but he was apparently not committed to his higher education. He would attend college sporadically over the next 16 years and would eventually earn a degree in sociology from Malone College in Canton in 1976. He decided he'd rather pursue his goal of working in a funeral home as a mortician or an undertaker, which was specialized training, and he did not need all the extras of a college degree. He would go on to graduate with honors from the Pittsburgh Institute of Mortuary Science. From 1964 to 1965, he worked at 3 different funeral homes in Canton, Ohio. One of his employers would say that Huberty enjoyed the process of embalming, along with all the other aspects of the job itself. But dreamers, if you're wondering like I'm wondering, you might question if this would be the perfect calling for him, for someone like Huberty, with a personality such as his. If you don't really like interacting with people all that much, it might be the perfect job, since you're dealing with deceased individuals. But then again, you do have to deal with grieving families, people who are going to need to be handled in a gentle and compassionate way. And yeah, according to his former employer, that was definitely a problem. His extremely introverted personality left Huberty unable to appropriately interact with the bereaved, which is an integral part of being an undertaker. He just always wanted to be alone. I imagine when Huberty first picked this as a career path, he thought that working with the dead was going to be easy peasy for him. Little did he know he was going to have to work with the living as well. It was at mortuary school that Huberty would meet Etna. The couple got married in 1965 while he was working as an intern embalmer. He eventually went on to receive first his license to be a funeral director, and then later his license to embalm. But like I said, working as a mortician wasn't really a good fit for his personality type. So, he attended Lincoln Electric Welding School in the city of Cleveland, Ohio, and later got a job as a welder with McComber's Manufacturing Company in the town of Louisville, Ohio in 1966. And this job, I'm sure he chose for one reason and one reason alone. When you're a welder, not only do you get to hide behind a mask, people have to stay away from you while you're welding. It's the perfect job for someone like Huberty. A few years later, he returned to Canton where he got a job as a welder with Babcock and Wilcox, making replacement parts in the steel manufacturing industry. This time, his job lasted many years, much longer than the previous places of employment, 13 years to be exact. He had earned seniority and was doing well for himself and his family. Etna found employment as a substitute teacher at the elementary school level, and the couple purchased their first home in Massillon, Ohio, and they had 2 daughters, Zelia and Cassandra. Neighbors of the Hubertys at this time in Massillon began to grow increasingly concerned with him and some of his behaviors and tendencies. In one incident, a neighbor recalled that they were outside talking when one of Huberty's German shepherds scratched his car. So, this is going to be graphic and disturbing. If you're sensitive to cruelty to animals, please advance your podcast now 15 to 20 seconds. So, Huberty took the German shepherd into his backyard and shot the dog in his head. Huberty came back and said, "There, I took care of it." And that was how Huberty handled things that upset him. He annihilated his problems. The same neighbor also recalled, late into the night, that he would hear some loud thumping sounds coming from the direction of Huberty's house. He later came to discover that Huberty set up his own personal shooting range in his basement and was doing some target practice down there. I don't know if that's a normal thing out there in the steel mining country, to target shoot in one's basement. I find it to be quite bizarre, and there is no way anyone could fire a weapon inside a home without somebody around here, at least where I live, completely freaking out. And not a lot of houses where I'm from have basements. Matter of fact, I've never been in a basement, nor do I want to be in one. So yeah, practice shooting in the basement. Didn't know that was a thing. In 1980, Massillon police arrested and charged Huberty with public intoxication and disorderly conduct at a local gas station. In the end, he wasn't given a fine, and he was only ordered to pay $46 in court costs. And other than that, Huberty had really no criminal history to speak of. However, over the years, hundreds and hundreds of complaints were recorded against him by the Massillon Police Department regarding his German Shepherds. How they were unruly, loud, often free-roaming, and generally a nuisance. A former co-worker of Huberty's recalled his interactions with him being generally awkward, always talking about shooting people who frustrated him. This co-worker described Huberty as borderlining on paranoia when it came to the end of the world. He constantly discussed survivalist techniques and stockpiled weaponry, as he was certain that a nuclear war was looming and that the world was going to come to an end by way of a nuclear apocalypse. Huberty was convinced that he was prepared to survive a nuclear war and that he and his family would be the only people left on the planet, and that he would be prepared, hidden in the woods in some kind of underground radiation-proof bunker. He always talked about surviving in the wilderness, surviving by isolation. Then for Huberty, the first domino fell. He lost his job as a welder when Babcock and Wilcox shuttered its doors in 1982. The manufacturing industry in Middle America had been hit by some hard times in the early 80s, and more people were finding themselves in the unemployment lines, Huberty being one of them. At the same time, the cost of living began skyrocketing. Utility costs were soaring, and the financial strain hit the Hubertys hard. Huberty, having grown increasingly disgruntled with the situation, decided he had had enough. But he wasn't going to take his family to go live off of nature in the woods. He decided he was done with America, and in the fall of 1983, the Hubertys moved south of the border to Tijuana, Mexico. He figured that with the profits from the sale of their home that they would be able to live much more comfortably in Mexico as opposed to the United States. Okay, I can kind of see that making sense, but the sale of their home didn't quite go as well as they thought it would, in which the Hubertys ended up taking a total loss of $89,000. And not only that, being in Mexico may not have been the wisest choice for a man like James Huberty. Let me explain. He was not going to be a good fit in Mexico. He could not acclimate to the Mexican community or the culture. He didn't know how to speak Spanish, and he found himself feeling like kind of an outcast, a complete outsider, totally rejected by the community that he settled in. When the Tijuana police stopped him for speeding on his motorcycle, he called them derogatory racist names. But his wife would later insist that he wasn't a racist by definition. No. Even though he subscribed to very radical beliefs and ideology about his place as being superior to people of other racial and ethnic backgrounds. Nope, she said, he's not a racist. She would describe him as a Nazi. Okay. Dreamers, I don't want to split hairs, but where I'm from, being a Nazi or a neo-Nazi kind of insinuates that you're racist. But I don't always know all the nuances of it all. I mean, perhaps with Etna's way of thinking, her way of justifying her husband's belief system is that just because one thinks they are superior by virtue of being white, that doesn't necessarily mean there's all this hatred towards other races. I honestly don't know, and I'm sorry if this is offending all of you, but to me, labeling someone a Nazi makes me think that that person's racist. So, whatever. Etna would say that her husband's a Nazi. But then she follows that up with the fact that her husband thought he was German. He told people that he was, but she said that he wasn't. I looked it up, and it looks like the origins of his name kind of do trace back to that area of Europe, Luxembourg particularly, so close enough. Anyway, the family only lasted in Tijuana for 3 months, and Huberty had had it. This would be another domino falling for him. He complained the city of being strewn with litter and much too crowded, so they moved back to the United States, this time to the border town of San Ysidro, California. Which is kind of weird, right? He moved to Mexico thinking it would be more economically feasible, but then he decides he doesn't like it, so he moves to one of the most expensive states in the Union to live in? Okay, but being back in the United States, Huberty still wasn't able to find any sort of peace of mind. He continued feeling disenfranchised by what happened to him in his job back in Ohio. To him, everything in Ohio was right for him, and California was just not going to be the place he was going to be able to function. Etna suggested that they head back there, but he said he wasn't interested in dealing with the freezing cold winters and the outrageous cost of heating your home. And I kind of get that. Once you've experienced a Southern California winter, if you're from anywhere in the Midwest, you're probably not going to want to go back. That's how my family ended up in California. My dad was raised in Michigan, Detroit specifically. And when he joined the Navy in World War II, he got sent to California. And he never wanted to see another Michigan winter again. But I digress. Being unemployed, Huberty qualified for some federally funded job training and retraining programs. So he went and trained in the security guard program. On April 12, 1984, the Bureau of Collections and Investigative Services issued him a permit to carry a .38 caliber revolver or a .357 Magnum. It was later discovered at the first place that he applied for a job as a security guard. An employee observed the word "no" in big block letters scrawled across his application. Huberty just gave off a weird vibe, kind of unstable, not really suited for what they were looking for in a guard. He was eventually hired as a security guard at a condominium construction site. But in short order, he was fired on July 10th, 1984. Yet another domino. If you were to ask Etna, she would say her husband didn't seem too worried about having lost yet another job. But then she'd say this is when he started hearing voices. This lady is a wealth of contradictions in talking about her husband, isn't she? He seems okay, but he's hearing voices? Okay, if you say so. There was a day during the winter, just after Huberty's move to San Ysidro, that, out of nowhere, he approached a police officer and proclaimed to him that he was a war criminal. This, Etna would say, is when he first began hearing voices, talking to people that weren't there. He began obsessing over all things war-related, but nothing seemed all that alarming to either that officer he approached or to Etna. He was just a bit off. The latest episode he had right after he was fired, Etna described that he said Christ told him about something, that he had had a vision about something that happened to him when he was 9 years old, that he was standing in a street, and there was a legionnaire on a horse. So, a member of the French Legion or something like that? I don't know. So he had this vision of a 15-year-old boy that stabbed the horse and the legionnaire fell down to the ground. And when he got back up, he drew his sword and took hold of 3 people, demanding to know if they knew who the boy was that stabbed his horse. They told him yes, they knew him, and the legionnaire gave them each a gold piece. The following day, he went to the boy's house and with his sword killed his parents. Then he placed the sword in the hands of the boy who had stabbed his horse and said, "There, you've killed them." Totally bizarre, right? I don't really get all the symbolism of Huberty's vision. And honestly, I don't really want to take the time to try and decipher that mess. 1 week later, Huberty would take his family to court to have those ticket fines dismissed, then to the San Diego Zoo, then for a meal at McDonald's. They arrived home and he changed out of the yellow jersey he had been wearing and put on a burgundy-colored t-shirt, camouflage pants, told his wife he was going hunting for humans, kissed her and his kids goodbye, and drove away in his black Mercury Marquis sedan a little bit before 4 p.m., July 18, 1984. Concealed under that checkered blanket, Huberty had with him 3 weapons: a 9mm Uzi carbine, a 9mm Browning HP, and a 12-gauge Winchester 1200. For those who are like me and aren't that familiar with guns, the Winchester 1200 is a pump-action shotgun, which has the option of attaching a bayonet to the end of it for close quarters combat. It was predominantly used in the Vietnam War. The Browning HP is a semi-automatic pistol and was one of the most widely used military pistols in history. And the Uzi is an Israeli submachine gun that has been used by foreign militaries since 1956 to the present time. The Uzi carbine is similar to the submachine gun, but it is modified with a 16-inch barrel to meet the length requirements for sale in the United States. And this, dreamers, is what this man was armed with: weapons of war. According to witnesses, Huberty traveled along San Ysidro Boulevard, first to the Big Bear supermarket, then towards a United States post office. I'm not sure what he might have been doing. Maybe contemplating going to one of those establishments. He ended up pulling into the parking lot of a McDonald's restaurant, located a distance of only 200 yards from where he lived. For the next 77 minutes, James Huberty would unleash a complete and total, merciless attack on every single person that came into his path. He did not discriminate. Men, women, boys, girls, young, old, children, infants, everyone. For the next several minutes, I'm going to walk you through the events as they unfolded that day. The details are devastating, so you'll either need to brace yourselves or fast forward. At 3:56 p.m., Huberty pulled into the parking lot at the McDonald's restaurant on San Ysidro Boulevard, just up the street from his apartment. With him, he had some sort of cloth bag which contained his 9mm Browning, his 9mm Uzi carbine, his 12-gauge Winchester 1200, along with hundreds and hundreds of rounds of ammunition for each of his 3 weapons. The restaurant was teeming with customers at this hour, some having lunch with family and friends, kids stopping in to get drinks or sundaes on the warm summer afternoon, some having come across the international border to enjoy a meal at the place. Many were children. Many were of Mexican heritage. Some didn't speak English. About 50 in all. All of them were targets. Huberty entered the restaurant a few minutes after pulling into the parking lot. He took his shotgun out of his bag and took aim at a young man working behind the counter, 16-year-old John Arnold. His assistant manager, Guillermo Flores, saw Huberty brandishing this weapon and shouted, "Hey, John, that guy's gonna shoot you." Before he could react, Huberty pulled the trigger, but nothing happened. It jammed. While Huberty stood there trying to work on the jam, McDonald's restaurant manager, 22-year-old Neva Kane, just 6 weeks back from her honeymoon, approached the service counter where all of this was happening towards where John Arnold was standing. It didn't seem like the employees were understanding the seriousness of what was about to happen. John Arnold thought it was some kind of rude prank. As Neva got closer to the counter, John walked away from Huberty so his manager could deal with the guy. It was then Huberty test-fired his shotgun, pointing it up towards the ceiling and firing. He then armed himself with his Uzi carbine, took aim at Neva Kane, and fired once, striking her just below the left eye. She died within a few minutes. After Huberty shot Neva, he switched back to a shotgun, took aim, and fired at John Arnold, wounding him in the chest. He then yelled at everyone in the restaurant to get down on the ground, or words to that effect. He called all of them dirty swine, and told them that he was in Vietnam and that he has killed thousands and it was his intentions to kill 1,000 more. Dreamers, this man did not serve a minute in the United States military. He probably wished he had. He probably knew he was too chicken or weird or unstable to make it past the qualifying rounds. A customer, 25-year-old Victor Rivera, having heard the vitriol that was spewing from Huberty, witnessing that he shot Neva and John, Victor tried to intervene. He attempted to talk to the gunman, to talk him out of shooting anyone else. But Huberty was on a mission. He wasn't going to be talked out of this. He aimed his weapon at Victor and shot him 14 times. As Victor screamed and cried in pain and in fear, Huberty shouted at him repeatedly to shut up, shut up, shut up. Customers did what they could to hide and take cover, beneath tables, behind the service counters, but there really was nowhere to hide. Huberty's attention turned next to a group of 6 women and children, huddled together, the grown-ups desperately trying to shield the young ones. With a single shot to the chest, he next killed 19-year-old Maria Colmenero Silva. Then, with his Uzi carbine, he shot 9-year-old Claudia Perez in her stomach, chest, cheek, thigh, hip, leg, back, armpit, and head, killing her instantly. Claudia's older sister, 15-year-old Imelda Perez, was shot 1 time in the chest with the same weapon that killed her sister, the Uzi carbine. Next, Huberty picked up his shotgun and fired it at 11-year-old Aurora Pena. Shot in the leg, Aurora was shielded by her aunt, Jackie Reyes. Huberty switched back to his Uzi, took aim at Jackie, and unloaded 48 rounds into her body and her unborn baby. Jackie's son was next to her, 8-month-old Carlos Reyes. He sat up and began to cry. Huberty silenced him with 1 pistol shot to the middle of his back. Huberty next shot and killed Lawrence Versluis, a 62-year-old truck driver who had stopped in for a bite to eat. Spotting another group, a family who had been in the McDonald's playland area of the restaurant. Again, the adults shielded the children with their bodies as they cowered under the tables. 31-year-old Brythe Regan Herrera attempted to shield her son, 11-year-old Mateo, under one booth, and her husband, Ronald Herrera, shielded his son's friend, 12-year-old Keith Thomas, under a booth across from his wife and son. As Huberty advanced towards the group, he began firing at those who were seated in the restaurant. As he was getting closer, Ronald Herrera whispered to Keith to not move. Huberty aimed his weapon directly at them, sweeping the area under the table with gunfire where they tried to protect the children. Keith was shot in his arm, shoulder, wrist, and elbow, but otherwise was not seriously wounded. Ronald was shot 8 times in the stomach, chest, arm, and head. However, he managed to survive his wounds. His wife, Blythe, and son, Mateo, both died as a result of multiple gunshot wounds to the head. Also in the Playland area were 2 other women who were attempting to hide under a booth as well. 24-year-old Guadalupe Del Rio and her friend who was shielding her, 31-year-old Araceli Vargas. Guadalupe was shot in the back, abdomen, chest, neck, but none of her wounds were fatal. Her friend Araceli, however, was shot once in the back of the head. She would succumb to her injuries the following day and was the only person who died that actually made it to the hospital. All the others killed that day died at the restaurant. Huberty moved on to the next booth, where he shot and killed Hugo Vasquez with a single gunshot to the chest. The first call to 911 for emergency services was received by dispatchers at 4 p.m., but the dispatcher made what I think is an egregious error and sent first responders 2 miles or 3 kilometers away to the wrong McDonald's. In the documentary, 77 Minutes, this error would be downplayed by the San Diego Police Department, claiming that the response was only delayed by 2 or 3 minutes at the most. But according to reports that I read, the delay took upwards of 10 minutes to correct and to get officers to the right location. A 6-block radius surrounding the McDonald's was cordoned off by police, locking down the immediate area. Although, as we get back to Huberty's rampage, you will find that there were some that unknowingly entered into the parking lot, either by foot, by car, or by bicycle, that quite possibly could have been prevented from doing so if police had been dispatched to the correct location. I can't say that with complete certainty, but what I do know is police were delayed, and people were still headed into the McDonald's unaware of the danger inside. So when the police department downplayed going to the wrong McDonald's, it kind of bothered me that they failed to take responsibility for that. I do believe this error cost more lives to be lost unnecessarily as a direct result of this miscommunication. The San Diego police established their command post 2 blocks away from the restaurant, and 175 officers were deployed to the scene, each one in strategic locations. Within the hour, the SWAT, or Special Weapons and Tactics team, arrived, who also took strategic positions surrounding the McDonald's, including their highly trained sharpshooters. Following the first 911 call, prior to the arrival of law enforcement, Lydia Flores pulled her vehicle into the parking lot of the McDonald's with her 2-year-old daughter in the car with her. She pulled up to the drive-thru, but suddenly noticed that some of the windows were shattered. She could hear the distinct sound of rapid gunfire coming from inside. She glanced over and looked through the windows, and she could see Huberty inside shooting. She threw her vehicle into reverse and floored it out of the drive-thru, crashing into a fence behind her. She remained hidden in her vehicle with her toddler until the shooting ended. Still, with no police anywhere in sight, 3 11-year-old boys, friends, Joshua Coleman, Omar Alonso Hernandez, and David Flores Delgado, arrived at the restaurant on their bikes. They entered by way of the west parking lot and pulled up next to the entrance to park their bikes. The friends were there to get some soft drinks. Someone across the street, a bystander, a witness to what was going on, but keeping their distance, attempted to yell out to the boys. But what it was this person was yelling, the boys couldn't tell. They hesitated momentarily, their attention turned towards whatever it was this person across the street was trying to say to them, which we know was a warning to get away from that restaurant. But it was too late. From inside, Huberty noticed the 3 friends. He aimed both his shotgun and then his Uzi carbine at them and opened fire. Joshua was struck in the back, arm, and leg. He was critically wounded. He glanced over at his friends and saw Omar lying on the ground with several gunshot wounds to his back. He could hear sounds coming from his friend. The sounds that the body makes when one is in the process of dying. And then he saw him vomit. And then he saw him go quiet. He looked at David. He had several gunshot wounds to the head. It was likely he was gone before he fell to the ground. Joshua would survive. At 4:10 p.m., with still no significant police presence, at least none that was visible, married couple Maricela and Astolfo Felix, along with their 4-month-old daughter Carlita, drove into the parking lot with the intentions of proceeding into the drive-thru. Astolfo saw the shattered glass, but thought it was perhaps some renovations being made to the building. He also saw Huberty approaching his vehicle, but thought he was someone working on the building. Huberty brandished once again both his shotgun and his Uzi carbine, firing at the couple and their infant. Maricela was struck in the face, arms, and chest. Astolfo was struck in the chest and head, and baby Carlita was critically wounded, shot in the neck, chest, and abdomen. Astolfo and Maricela, wounded and bleeding, desperately staggered to get away from Huberty's gunfire. And Maricela, in a moment of sheer desperation and fear, placed her crying infant into the arms of a fleeing woman and begged her in Spanish to please save her baby. Maricela then fell to the ground, slumping against a parked vehicle. The woman fled the scene with Carlita and was able to give the infant to a police officer who rushed her to the hospital. All 3 of them would survive, Carlita being the youngest victim of the massacre that day, and she and her mom would go on for the rest of their lives to share the same exact scar across their abdomens. Huberty went back inside the McDonald's, still unimpeded by any kind of police presence. He walked over to the service counter and pulled out a small portable radio that he had with him. It's been speculated that perhaps he was searching radio stations for any news reports of his shooting spree. He ran through the dial, finally opting for a music station, set the radio down, and returned to what he was there to do: hunt humans. He entered into the kitchen area. By this time, the French fried deep fryer alarms were going off, left to burn with nobody to attend to them. Looking around, Huberty spotted 6 employees hiding. He took aim and opened fire on the group. 21-year-old Paulina Lopez, 19-year-old Elsa Fierro, and 18-year-old Margarita Padilla were killed. Before being shot to death, Margarita encouraged her co-worker, 17-year-old Wendy Flanagan, to make a run for it, which she did, hiding in a basement storage room with 4 other employees along with the female customer. 17-year-old employee Alberto Leos was shot and critically wounded, and he managed to make it to the storage room with the others. These people did not run in that direction, though, to the back of the kitchen to hide in that storage room. They ran that direction towards the emergency exit. But when they reached that door and tried to open it, it was locked. The management of this McDonald's restaurant made it their own policy to keep that door locked to prevent employee theft, despite the fact that every single emergency exit in every single building that I've ever seen is clearly marked that an alarm will sound if the door is open and must remain unlocked during business hours for this exact reason. Can you guys even think of how absolutely terrifying it must have been to push on that door only to find it locked? Just awful. And then, with Alberto Leos in the room with them, shot multiple times, writhing in pain, the others had to keep a rag over his mouth in order to keep him quiet as to not alert the gunman to their location. Huberty emerged from the kitchen and peered out the window, watching traffic pass by. He spotted a fire engine driving by, relatively close to the location. He opened fire on it as it passed, hitting it several times but did not injure anyone inside. Huberty then heard some moaning. The sounds were coming from 19-year-old Jose Perez. He approached the wounded teenager and shot him in the head. Jose slumped over dead in the booth he was seated in. Next to him, also shot dead, was his friend, 22-year-old Gloria Gonzalez, and another woman, 18-year-old Michelle Carncross. Aurora Pena, who had been shot but was still alive, was laying quietly next to her pregnant Aunt Jackie and her cousin, 8-month-old Mateo. During one of the lulls in the shooting, Aurora opened her eyes and found the gunman staring directly at her. He cursed at the 11-year-old, then threw a bag of French fries at her, and then went to get a shotgun. He came back and shot her in the arm, neck, and chest. Aurora managed to survive her injuries, but she remained hospitalized the longest out of all of the survivors that day. Huberty's shooting spree would last for 77 minutes, firing approximately 250 rounds. All of it came to an end with one shot. One of only 5 that the 175 police officers and SWAT team members surrounding the restaurant would fire that afternoon. San Diego police maintained that the first responding officer arrived at the scene shortly after the call went out over the radio regarding the shots fired at the McDonald's. But the questions continue to linger, even to this day. Why did it take so long for police officers to take action? Their command post was 2 blocks away, and communication, or lack thereof, obviously was hindering things. According to the lieutenant in charge at the scene, Paul Ibarrando, now retired and a 36-year veteran of the force, described the lack of detailed information his officers were receiving when they arrived. They didn't know how many shooters there were, what kinds of weapons were being used, and nothing about any potential victims. He described the windows of the McDonald's being tinted, and the way they were manufactured caused them to shatter but not shatter to the ground. The window remained in place, cracked and riddled with bullet holes, making it even more difficult to get a clear view inside the restaurant, preventing the snipers perched nearby from being able to get a good look and possibly a clear shot. When this mass shooting occurred in 1984, incidents such as these were not as commonplace as they are today, and it would actually be this specific event that shaped the manner in which law enforcement would respond to such threats in the years to come. The officers that day had no idea how to handle a situation like this that they were faced with. It was sheer chaos. Aside from the failures in communication, the San Diego Police Department lacked access to armored vehicles, support from the air, as well as any kind of specialized equipment to contend with a mass shooting such as this. And all of these things, they would say, inhibited their ability to respond in a timelier manner. Ibarrando would say, under the circumstances, his officers did the best that they could. Police have also stated in defense of their decision to not take any aggressive action that because no one could get a clear shot of Huberty due to all of the broken windows and obstructions, that they feared that if they did, and they missed, it would only incite the shooter even more, causing him to possibly kill more hostages. You can do with that what you will, dreamers. I am certainly in no position to be critical of the way police handle situations like this. And true, they really had no idea what exactly was going on. But still, I have a hard time wrapping my head around the fact that 175 armed officers, including expert SWAT marksmen, had this place surrounded, and nobody took a kill shot for 77 minutes. Not everybody inside was dead, yet. That became obvious later when it was apparent that several of the dead bodies had bloodied napkins in their hands, held in places where it was obvious that they were trying to stop themselves from bleeding out. Not everybody died instantly. Some of them bled to death because nobody ever came to help them. I am going to give you a minute-by-minute breakdown of what took place in terms of police response. I know we've gone over some of this. However, this will get pretty specific and put things into more perspective for you time-wise. At 4 p.m., police received the first of many calls about a shooting at the McDonald's. At 4:04 p.m., 4 patrol units and a supervisor were dispatched to the scene, first arriving at the wrong McDonald's. At 4:05 p.m., a description of the shooter is broadcast. At 4:07 p.m., Officer Mike Rosario is the first officer to arrive at the scene, at the correct scene. He makes the radio call, shots being fired at me, return fire with 2 rounds, request code 10. He withdrew from the immediate area, and it is my understanding that a code 10 is a pre-SWAT call. At 4:08 p.m., a paramedic unit is on its way to the scene, but is prevented from getting close to the restaurant by gunfire, and the San Diego Fire Department dispatch alerts life flight emergency crews at University of California at San Diego Medical Center to prepare to dispatch helicopters. At 4:10 p.m., a police command center is being set up 2 blocks away from the McDonald's. A full SWAT alert is issued. At 4:12 p.m., the north side of the McDonald's is surrounded by police. At 4:15 p.m., the fire department radios life flight for a second time and orders a helicopter unit dispatched. At 4:18 p.m., Dr. Tom Newman, he's a San Diego Medical Center medic, a pilot, and 3 nurses board life flight helicopter number 2 and take off. At 4:19 p.m., McDonald's is completely surrounded by uniformed police and detectives. At 4:23 p.m., a second description of the suspect is broadcast. The shooting is continuing inside the restaurant. At 4:26 p.m., a second life flight helicopter is dispatched with another doctor, a pilot, and 2 nurses. At 4:28 p.m., a third description of the gunman is broadcast. At 4:29 p.m., SWAT team commander Lieutenant Jerry Sanders, who was at a reception in Mission Valley, is notified of the shooting after his pager failed to work. This led to an almost 30-minute delay in getting the SWAT team dispatched to the scene. At 4:35 p.m., the first SWAT sniper team arrives at the scene, relieving officers positioned at the north side of the McDonald's. At 4:45 p.m., all San Diego police officers are relieved by SWAT team members. However, I've read accounts that this occurred as late as 5 p.m., around the time the SWAT snipers get to the roof of the post office. At 4:46 p.m., 2 witnesses from inside the restaurant escape through a back door and are debriefed, providing vital information about the situation inside. At 4:48 p.m., A final, more accurate description of the shooter is broadcasted, based on information from the eyewitnesses who escaped. At 4:51 p.m., witnesses verify more than a dozen people are still inside the restaurant, but it cannot be determined how many are alive. They are also able to confirm that the suspect is alone and armed with multiple weapons. At 5:02 p.m., a second SWAT sniper team is placed on the roof at the post office across the street. At 5:04 p.m., the sniper team on the north side of the building asks if a green light, the order to shoot to kill, is authorized. At 5:05 p.m., Lieutenant Roy Blackledge, the field commander, issued the order over police radio, "The green light is on." But this is another one of the biggest controversies in terms of the police response to the shootings. SWAT team commander Lieutenant Jerry Sanders was in his vehicle en route to the scene, but stuck in traffic. When he heard the go-ahead order to shoot, he immediately radioed the order to be rescinded. I'll talk about this a little bit more after I finish the timeline. At 5:13 p.m., Lieutenant Sanders, now at the scene, gave the second green light order to shoot to kill the gunman. At 5:14 p.m., the gunman fires a volley of shots through the windows of the restaurant aimed toward San Ysidro Boulevard. At 5:16 p.m., SWAT officers on the ground near the post office fire 2 rounds at the suspect in response to the gunfire, and miss. Perched on the rooftop of the post office across the way, SWAT team marksman Chuck Foster watched Huberty through the scope of his high-powered rifle. He had the order to fire upon the gunman as soon as he had a clear shot, which is what he is trained to do: neutralize the situation when all else fails. He watched Huberty. He was the only thing moving in that restaurant. He waited to get what he called a good bead on him, which is cop speak and also hunting speak for lining up for the shot that's going to kill. Huberty was pacing around, looking at his victims, checking if anyone was moving, like he had done with Aurora. Chuck Foster waited until Huberty paused just long enough, and at 5:17 p.m., he took aim and fired a single round that slammed into Huberty's chest, slicing through his aorta, exiting his body, severing his spine as it did. Huberty's body fell backwards onto the floor, where he died in a matter of seconds, putting an end to what had just become the worst mass shooting incident in American history. Chuck Foster was only 29 years old when he fired that shot at Huberty. He was a former Green Beret but never went into combat and had been a sniper for 4 years. He attended counseling and was cleared to return to work 5 days after fatally shooting Huberty. To him, all he really had to do was keep his mind focused on the people Huberty killed, rather than let his mind wander to the fact that he killed Huberty. He had very little pity for him, considering all that he'd done that day. The command to shoot Huberty given at 5:05 p.m. by the commanding lieutenant at the scene was rescinded by the commanding lieutenant of the SWAT team. This really bothers me. Lots of things bother me about this. I find it troubling that the SWAT lieutenant was at a reception in Mission Valley and claimed that his pager did not go off, alerting him to the emergency. And in the documentary, the interviewer actually accuses him of having been drinking at this reception, which of course he denies. But that's not really a concern for me. People have cocktails at social functions all the time. And if he did, it just happened to be the worst timing ever. But the pager? It didn't work? I'm skeptical. Only because, if he was, say, at said reception or gathering, having some cocktails, talking, socializing, whatever, I'm more likely to think that my pager didn't work is code for I didn't hear it or I wasn't paying attention to it. So the guy is nearly a half hour behind everyone else in his response to this massacre that's going down. There is a commanding lieutenant at the scene, and once the SWAT snipers were poised, they asked if they had the green light. The lieutenant at the scene, being there, aware of what's happening, gave the go-ahead. But his orders were overridden by the SWAT lieutenant, who isn't at the scene. He is in traffic, listening to the police radio transmissions. It bugs me to no end that he would override the orders without having even arrived yet. I am not a police tactics expert. I'm just being judgy. What Lieutenant Sanders would say, citing the contingency response plan, is that he reversed the order so other officers could prepare to move in case the suspect was not killed by the first shot, a maneuver that is utilized in order to prevent the suspect, who may now be provoked by being shot at, from killing other presumed hostages. Okay, I get that, but he still wasn't at the scene. He was late because he was busy, not paying attention to his pager, or it wasn't working. Whatever. The police authorization to shoot Huberty being ordered, reversed, then reordered, caused an 8-minute delay in the taking down of the suspect. But the San Diego police said it wouldn't have mattered for 2 reasons. One is that a clear opportunity to shoot Huberty did not present itself until after the second green light was issued. And the second reason is that it is believed that all the victims inside the restaurant were already dead. Okay, if you say so. They did acknowledge that the conflicting orders was unusual, and they were going to have to review their policies when it comes to commanding officers. But just between us streamers, I kind of think it was an I'm in charge, no, I'm in charge kind of a thing. Just saying. The San Ysidro McDonald's massacre lasted 77 minutes. Huberty fired approximately 250 rounds of ammunition. 21 people were killed. 22, if you count the unborn baby. 23, if you count the gunman. 19 others were wounded. Killed inside the restaurant were 19-year-old Elsa Fierro, 22-year-old Neva Kane, 18-year-old Michelle Carncross, 19-year-old Maria Colmenero Silva, 22-year-old Gloria Lopez, 31-year-old Blythe Herrera, 11-year-old Mateo Herrera, 21-year-old Paulina Lopez, 18-year-old Margarita Padilla, 9-year-old Claudia Perez, 19-year-old Jose Perez, 25-year-old Victor Rivera, 31-year-old Aradelsi Vargas, 45-year-old Hugo Vasquez, 62-year-old Lawrence Verse Luis, 18-year-old Jackie Reyes, her 8-month-old son Carlos Reyes, and her unborn child. Killed outside the restaurant were 74-year-old Miguel Victoria, his 69-year-old wife Ada Victoria, 11-year-old David Delgado, and 11-year-old Omar Hernandez. In talking about what he saw when he arrived at the scene via the Life Flight helicopter, Dr. Tom Newman said, "It was like they had all just stopped in time. All these bodies were lying around. Heads were slumped on the table. The old man walking out the door was lying on the floor, his donuts beside him. 2 kids were dead by their bikes. The infant was dead in the arms of the people around him. There were 2 burned hamburgers sitting on the grill." For 7 years, the San Ysidro McDonald's massacre stood as the deadliest mass shooting in the United States, with 22 dead, including the shooter. It remained that way until the Luby's massacre in Killeen, Texas, that occurred in 1991, with 24 killed, including the shooter. Today, the San Ysidro massacre stands as the 7th deadliest shooting in the United States, with the Las Vegas shooting of 2017 topping the list with 59 dead, including the shooter. Second is the Orlando nightclub shooting of 2016, with 50 dead, including the shooter. Third is the Virginia Tech shooting of 2007, with 33 dead, including the shooter. Fourth is the Sandy Hook Elementary School shooting of 2012, with 28 dead, including the shooter. Fifth is the Sutherland Springs Church shooting of 2017, with 27 dead, including the shooter. Sixth is the Luby's Cafeteria, and seventh is San Ysidro, which you've already mentioned. The 8th deadliest is the University of Texas shooting of 1966, with 18 dead, including the shooter. 9th is the Stoneman Douglas High School shooting of 2018, with 17 dead. And rounding out the top 10 is the San Bernardino attack of 2015, with 16 dead, including the 2 perpetrators. I certainly don't want to get into the politics of all of this, but if I had to go with one thing I'd like to see happen, it's actually something that I heard earlier today when I was listening to the Generation Y podcast. The guys were discussing the Stanford rape case that took place here in California. Some of you may have heard the case against rapist Brock Turner, his lenient sentence for sexually assaulting an unconscious woman, commonly referred to as Emily Doe. That case made headlines a couple years back. Well, rapist Brock was spotted assaulting the unconscious woman by 2 Swedish medical students who saw something and said something. And I was like, yes, that's what needs to happen. That's what needed to happen with James Huberty. Yes, I'm looking at you, Etna. You saw something. You should have said something. She knew her husband was becoming unhinged and yet made a half-hearted attempt at sort of seeking some help, but ended up dropping the ball. Everyone dropped the ball. Every single one of these shooters, Stephen Paddock, Omar Mateen, Sang-Hoo Choi, Adam Lanza, Devin Patrick Kelly, George Hennard, James Huberty, Charles Whitman, Nicholas Cruz, Syed Farouk, and Tashfeen Malik. Every one of them had somebody close to them, somebody who knew them, someone who helped them, someone who saw their weapons, someone who noticed their anger and frustration. Someone saw something and said nothing. No one's ever said, oh yeah, Adam Lanza, he was a straight up cool guy, totally nice, social, never thought he was capable of something like this. No, all we hear is, yeah, dude was totally weird, completely awkward, couldn't even function in school, deeply troubled. Even his dad said Adam would have killed him too if he had the chance. Oh, and his mom, a gun enthusiast, gifted her awkward, troubled, withdrawn son with guns of his own. That's what I'm talking about. See something, say something. Especially now, with there hardly a month that goes by without news of another mass shooting. As I was researching and writing this episode, there was yet another one. And a mass shooting, it seems, is defined by 3, some say 4 casualties, this time in Nashville, Tennessee. 4 more innocent lives lost at that Waffle House. Don't be an Etna. Don't have your husband tell you he's going off to hunt humans and casually go on with your afternoon. I strongly believe that she could have been able to step in and prevented him from walking out that door. He had reached out for help, and nobody reached back, but she could have tried harder. Could she have known that he was going to stroll into a McDonald's and murder 21 innocent people? Well, yeah, kind of. He told her that he was going to do that. He told her. And for not making any attempt at contacting law enforcement, for that, I hold her responsible. It's the least she could have done. See something? Say something. In a matter of 2 days, the McDonald's was fixed back up into the condition it was before the massacre took place. Probably even better. There was a plan to reopen the restaurant in the hopes that it could just go back to being the McDonald's that it once was. Now, this is just my opinion, and I don't know what you guys think, but I find that to be really insensitive. The owners of the franchise trying to move forward with business as usual feels really cold to me. But then again, these would be the same individuals who made it a policy to lock their emergency exits to prevent employees from stealing food, so yeah, I'm not quite over that one either. But after the subject of reopening the McDonald's was discussed with community leaders, they came to the conclusion that it would be best if the restaurant was shut down. The newly remodeled, the newly renovated McDonald's was razed to the ground 10 days after the shooting. Another McDonald's was built nearby, but at a different location. McDonald's also donated $1 million to a survivors fund, and Joan Kroc, the widow of the McDonald's founder, Ray Kroc, contributed $100,000 of her own money to the fund. After the restaurant closed, McDonald's donated the land to the city of San Ysidro, but it was stipulated that no other restaurant be constructed at the site. Over the next several years, there were plans to turn the site into a memorial park for those who were killed, or some sort of place of remembrance, until the land was finally sold in February of 1988 to Southwestern College for $136,000, with the stipulation that a 300 square foot area at the front of the college campus extension would be designated as a permanent memorial to the 21 victims who died in the massacre. The memorial that stands there today is comprised of 21 hexagonal white marble pillars ranging in height from 1 to 6 feet, one for each one of the victims who died, the varying heights being a representation of the variety of ages of them all. Every anniversary, the memorial is adorned with flowers. And on the Mexican holiday, the Day of the Dead on November 1st, candles and offerings are placed there for the victims. Some of the family members of those killed, and some of the survivors of the massacre as well, filed lawsuits against the McDonald's Corporation, as well as the local franchisee in San Ysidro. Their suits were consolidated, but were eventually dismissed before they ever made it to trial. The plaintiffs appealed, but the dismissal was upheld by the California Court of Appeals, citing that McDonald's, or any other business, has no duty of care to protect patrons from an unforeseeable assault by a murderous madman, and the plaintiffs could not prove causation because the standard reasonable measures normally used by restaurants to deter criminals, things such as guards and closed-circuit television cameras, could not have possibly deterred the perpetrator, as he did not care about his own survival. And a couple of weeks following the massacre, old Etna was at it again when she was the first person to receive a payout from the Survivors Fund. Yeah, go figure. I don't know how that works, but she received $1,000 prior to her husband being cremated and obtained a permit to carry the ashes to Ohio to be interred. When the word got out that Etna received the grant, the very first one handed out, mind you, this prompted several donors to demand their money back, angered by the fact that the shooter's widow received any money at all. Some view Etna as much as a victim as any other, and apparently McDonald's heiress Joan Kroc herself was personally concerned for Etna's well-being as well. So I don't know. Maybe the grant would have been better used towards a trust for the Huberty's 2 young children. They had a difficult time at school after it was discovered it was their dad who had committed this atrocious crime. They were harassed by other students and eventually had to move a couple school districts over and re-enroll under different names. Something occurred to me as I was looking up Huberty's kids. It's rare for mass shooters to leave behind children, and I hadn't really thought about that before. It just adds yet another layer of sadness for them. The collateral damage these mass killers continue to cause for years, decades after they took so many lives. And Etna Huberty, at it again in 1986, sued both McDonald's and Babcock and Wilcox, where her husband was a welder for 13 years, in Ohio for $5 million. Her lawsuit claimed that the massacre was triggered by both a poor diet and her husband working around highly poisonous metals, further citing that the MSG in McDonald's food, combined with the high levels of lead and other metals discovered in Huberty's body at his autopsy, most likely having been built up from the fumes that he may have inhaled in his years working as a welder, that all of this stuff combined induced Huberty's delusions, causing him to fly into a homicidal rage. Her lawsuit was tossed out, and Etna Huberty passed away in 2003 of breast cancer. There is a documentary about this massacre entitled 77 Minutes. Dreamers, this documentary is not for everyone. It mainly focuses on the victims, but the documentarian, Charlie Min, is also heavily critical of the San Diego Police Department and the SWAT team's response to the report of an active shooter at the McDonald's. He presses the now retired officers about some of the issues we talked about here today: communication issues, the delays, but mostly why was the gunman allowed to continue shooting for 77 minutes? If you do want to watch the documentary, be forewarned that they will show you the entire police footage of the aftermath of the shooting. Officers videotaped a walkthrough to document the location and position of each victim, including the shooter, and you will see all 21 of them in the place where they fell dead that day. Everyone. It's not easy to watch. Charlie Min also talks to several of the survivors, and when they describe how their lives were destroyed because of this man, it just have some tissues with you. Much has been speculated as to why James Huberty did what he did. There's been talk about his fears of a nuclear apocalypse, that he was disgruntled, feeling marginalized after having lost his job, finding it difficult to hold down steady work beyond that. Some think it might have been his childhood, something that triggered in him when his mother abandoned them. He was upset with the government, the cost of living, his utility bills. So much so to the point that he up and took his family to live in a foreign country. But it's also been said that he was known to dislike minorities. So I don't see how he thought moving to Mexico was going to be a good move for him. He hated it, and it only lasted 3 months. And then he moves to a city right on the border of Mexico, where the population is predominantly, surprise, surprise, Mexican and Mexican Americans. I've been to San Diego many, many times, and the closer and closer you get to the international border, the more and more the Mexican culture is infused. It's very much a huge and celebrated part of all of California history. So, coming from Ohio, this might have been a culture shock to Huberty. So I have really no idea what the guy was thinking. What I do know is that there is no one answer to the question why that would leave me satisfied anyway. Because there is no reason to justify this or any other indiscriminate mass killing of innocent people. Huberty, with the kind of viciousness that just shatters your heart and soul, he opened fire on groups of families, mothers and fathers, children, babies, elderly folks, everyone just enjoying a summer afternoon at McDonald's. And he had just spent that afternoon eating at a different McDonald's earlier that day with his children and wife. Was he just sitting there, eating his food, looking around at all the families enjoying their day, and something just turned in his head? Did he say to himself, "This is where I need to go to spew all of my anger and hatred and vitriol at all these happy people"? And just a little while later, that's exactly what he did. Why? Because he lost his job? Because he's struggling financially? Because the mental health clinic didn't call him back? Because he hates Mexican people? You know, dreamers, this man seemed to target women and children. Could that have been a sign as to his anger towards his own mother? Because, as it is, women and children were the majority of those who died that day. I don't know what the reasons were in his own head, but I still feel very strongly that someone in his life, namely Etna, should have, could have, tried just a little bit harder. And that, dreamers, brings this episode of California Dreaming, the tale of the San Ysidro tragedy, to a close. And I want to thank all of you who commented on Dave's post in Facebook that inspired this story. This has been a tremendous week in true crime. It was like a trifecta. The East Area Rapist? Check. Bill Cosby? Check. And the killer of long missing Ashley Freeman and Loria Bible? Check. It just goes to show that you can't hide forever, even if you used to be America's favorite dad. Please don't forget to join us on Facebook. The discussion page is where we talk about all these cases that we cover each week, as well as all the current goings-on in the world of true crime. You can also follow California Dreaming on Twitter at CaliforniaPod and on Instagram at CaliforniaDreamingPod. If you listen to the show on iTunes, if you have a minute, I'd appreciate it if you leave a review, as that helps give the show more visibility. You can also leave a review on the California Dreaming Facebook page. We are also creating a Patreon, and there, for just $1 a month, you can enjoy the bonus content that I've uploaded on there. California Dreaming is brought to you by the Orbital Jigsaw Network, where I am proud to be a part of a very, very talented group of podcast hosts across all different genres, from TV and film to gaming to history. Shows like The Concession Stand, Busted Wide Open, The Super Nerds UK, The Dirty Bits, Historium, Is This Adulting, 41 Owned, Film Roast, Vox Arcana, which is a Dungeons and Dragons podcast, and The Podience, a new show geared towards podcast hosts and aspiring hosts, giving you all the ins and outs of the podcasting world. And last week, yours truly was a guest on the Film Roast podcast, where I gave a review for the made-for-TV movie, Jodi Arias, Dirty Little Secret. So, if you have a chance, go download Film Roast with Hannah and Julia and listen to me give my 2 cents about that movie. You can find all of us on www.orbitaljigsaw.com, where you can also find links to our blog, The Vortex, where we write about and review other podcasts. And the links to our merchandise store is there as well, where you can support any of our shows with every purchase. Mugs, tote bags, hoodies, etc. Thank you again so much for listening. I hope you have a wonderful and safe week, and until next time, sweet dreams.